All right, y'all, welcome back to another AP Microeconomics video with Mr. Seidel. This time we're going over lesson 4.5, Introduction to Oligopolies. Right, so what is an oligopoly? An oligopoly, it sounds like a monopoly, but it's slightly different, right? A monopoly is when one business dominates the entire market. An oligopoly is when a few businesses dominate the entire market, right? So how many businesses are a few, right? I would say, on average, an oligopoly, there needs to be about less than 10 businesses, right? We have a few very, very large producers, and that's what makes an oligopoly an oligopoly. So when I think of oligopolies, I like to think about internet service providers or cell phone service, right? We have examples like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. There's not a lot of options when we go out and we buy cell phone service, right? Even those other options like Cricket and Sprint and things like that, those businesses are owned by those bigger ISPs like T-Mobile, right? And so an oligopoly, in order to be an oligopoly, there has to be less than 10 producers, right? Now, the next thing that an oligopoly offers is it offers differentiated products. The products can be similar, like cell phone service, right? But there has to be something that distinguishes them between the two. Generally speaking, this is like design or features, right? So an example of a differentiated product is Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, and Amazon Prime. That's an oligopoly, right? It's an oligopolies that control our streaming services. But the products, although similar, like television, they're different, right? Each service offers a different product, and so that's what we mean by differentiated products, right? In order for an oligopoly to be an oligopoly, probably the most important characteristic of an oligopoly is this idea of high barriers to entry. It needs to be very, very expensive to get into the business, right? If it was easy to become a streaming website, I wouldn't be a streaming website instead of a teacher on YouTube, right? If it was easy to become an internet service provider, there would be more internet service providers, right? These businesses are incredibly expensive and they're incredibly large. And what that does is it reduces the number of producers because only very rich and wealthy corporations are able to create these businesses. They're the only ones with enough capital, with enough money to actually start a business like an oligopoly. Now, these oligopolies, because there's very few of them, they have control over the price. That makes them price makers, right? They set their own price, and they're able to set their own price because they have differentiated products with different features and different designs, right? Now, the last characteristic of an oligopoly is that these firms are mutually interdependent. These firms are totally reliant on each other, right? When iPhone comes out with a new feature, it affects Samsung. And when Samsung comes out with a new feature, it affects iPhone. When T-Mobile has a special, it affects Verizon and AT&T, right? These businesses, because there's so few of them, right, rely on each other for their profit, for their revenue. When one business acts, it affects the other. These firms are interdependent, and it results in three different types of oligopolies, right? Three different types of oligopolies. The first type we call as price leadership oligopoly. It is illegal in most Western countries like the United States and in Canada. It is illegal for these businesses to work together. We'll talk about that in a second, right? That's called collusion. So, how do they set prices? How do these businesses set prices? Well, we can look at a small town gas station example. Usually, if you drive through a small town, gas prices are all the same. I don't actually think this matters in small towns or in large towns, but if you got two gas stations, one on each corner, right? Generally speaking, the prices are very, very similar, right? Well, why is that? One, it's illegal for them to work together to set prices, right? And so what do they do instead? Well, when one business raises their price, sometimes the other business will follow along, right? Or sometimes when one business lowers the price, the other business will be forced to lower the price, right? How do we decide who goes first? Generally speaking, the dominant firm will initiate the price change. The bigger firm will initiate the price change. And the other firms follow the leader because they have to. Now, we do have stuff called price wars, right? A price war is when one firm doesn't follow the other firm's price. Let's say I raise my prices and I lose customers because they go to you. You're not going to raise the price, right? And so in this next video, you'll look at game theory, which looks at why do businesses act, when do they act, when one business does something, what does the other business do, right? But with price leadership, when prices change around, you don't have to follow the leader. You don't have to follow the leader. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it'll make you more money if you do. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll make money if you engage in a price war, right? The next type of oligopoly is a colluding oligopoly. A colluding oligopoly is when these oligopolies work together to set prices. And like I said, that's illegal, at least here, but in other places it's not, right? When oligopolies collude, it forms something called a cartel. So here's an example. Let's imagine that all of the Walmarts and HEBs down here decided to raise prices overnight for toilet paper, right? Let's say they set it to $15 a roll. Well, as consumers, we wouldn't have any choice, right, other than to buy this expensive toilet paper because all of the producers that offer toilet paper, Walmart, HEB, right, have all agreed to raise the price. That is called collusion. That's when these oligopolies work together to raise prices to extract more profit from consumers. Like I said, this is illegal, and it creates what's called a cartel, right? This cartel, this group of oligopolies, they work together to create a monopoly, and so the graph is very similar. It's just your basic monopoly graph. So instead of it being one business, now it's a bunch of businesses working together. They agree to set up the price a certain way, they agree to set the output a certain way, and they share in the profits. Now, the last type of oligopoly is where it gets a little bit complicated, and so I'm going to switch to the iPad in a second and draw it out. These are non-colluding oligopolies. These are when oligopolies do not work together, right? So, when price leadership happens, when a business decides to raise the price or when a business decides to lower a price, the other businesses have a choice. They can either match the price or they can ignore the price change. And what this does is it creates a very, very strange graph, which we're going to call the kinked demand curve. Okay? So, you decide to raise your price. Your price goes up. What would what would the other businesses do if you raise your price? If you raise your price, those businesses, they're going to ignore it, right? Because if you raise your price, consumers are going to go to those other businesses, right? Well, what is that going to mean for your revenue? Your price is going to have gone up and your quantity is going to go way down, which means your revenue has gone way down. If you do that total revenue dance, your elasticity is very elastic. You have a very elastic demand line. Now, if you lower your price, what's everyone else going to have to do? They're also going to have to lower the price because they don't want to lose out on customers, right? And so although you lowered your price, so did everyone else, which means that your revenue didn't actually change by all that much. And because your revenue doesn't change by all that much, your elasticity is inelastic, right? Well, then let's draw out what that looks like. At first, your demand is very elastic. Let me redraw that. First, your demand is very elastic. But then, if you lower that price, your demand becomes very inelastic, so it becomes much steeper. And so what we have with this oligopoly is we have a kinked demand line, right? Because we have an elastic range and we have an inelastic range. All right, y'all, that is oligopolies. That's lesson 4.5. Next, you'll be looking at game theory, which is really, really fun. It's the way to analyze how different oligopolies act when it comes to price leadership, right? Hope you have a good one.